it's a weird concept that you have a final mix and everything is made like everything sounds the best it can be, and then there's still another step necessary. And why is that?
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. My name is Benedict Hein. I am your host, and I'm here with my amazing Canadian co-host, Malcolm Owen-Flood. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. Benny. Stoked to be here. How are you this week?
I'm doing fantastic, and this has been a particularly fantastic day. And there are a couple of reasons for that, because first of all, it was really fantastic today. Because first of all, the weather is perfect. Second, I had crazy busy days last week. I worked super long hours, did a lot of stuff that was pretty exhausting, great, but exhausting. And today was the first day that I had a relaxed breakfast with the family. Then I took my bike and I went up the nearest mountain and I sat there and I had a beer with me and I drank that beer in the sun on the mountain. And then I got back home and then I took a nap. And then I had lunch with the family, and then I did some mixer revisions, and then I got two amazing plugins, an amp sim and a drum MIDI thing. I got the Room Sound Bo Burchell MIDI drums, and or virtual drums, which are crazy good. And then I got the STL Tone Hub plugin. So yeah, that was also New Gear Day and pretty cool things that I got. And then now I'm here recording this podcast with you, so it couldn't be much better, actually. But I have to add one thing, the day took kind of a dramatic turn right before we started this recording, because you guys can't see that at home on your, you can see that because you're listening to the podcast, right? But I'm here at home and not at my studio due to Corona stuff. And I still don't have a real mic stand at home because I always forget it at the studio, and I have a real makeshift thing here that I'm going to show to Malcolm. These are just rolls of tape stacked on each other, and the mic taped in the middle of them. I can't even explain what that is. It's just a stack of tape rolls and the mic placed in that thing, and it works.
Okay, you gotta take a photo of that to post when this episode goes live. That is way too good.
And the thing is, I had to tape the mic to that thing because it wouldn't it wouldn't stay in the same position basically. And then I accidentally swallowed a piece of that tape, and now I'm afraid I'm gonna die. I don't know if it's poisonous or whatever. I bit the tape off, swallowed a piece of it, and now it's stuck in my throat. I can still feel it, and I'm afraid it will be there forever. So
you'll be all right, I'm sure.
Yeah. So that was my day. I don't know what was your day like?
I mean, okay, that's hilarious. The sun is just come up in Canada here. So my day is just beginning, but that sounds awesome. I think I'm going to copy your day. I'm going to definitely do a hike because the sun is meant to be. I'm just going to quickly look at the weather. Yep, it's going to be sunny today, a high of 13. I'm excited. So I'm going to go hike and bring a beer with me for sure. And then I might grab STL Tone Hub.
Yeah,
I've been
do that.
Thinking about checking it out. I mean, I love my Kemper so much, and I love my amps so much, but that thing looks pretty cool, I gotta say.
Yes, I haven't played around with it much. They had a trial that I played with a little bit, and I heard of obviously some examples before I bought it, but I just went for it because I was kind of convinced, and I loved their other stuff, and so far it's absolutely fun, and there are so many expansion packs and stuff. I think there's not you can't really go wrong with that, I think. So that's a great thing for sure. Yeah.
Totally.
All right. So today we are not talking about amp sims or virtual drums. We did that already a lot, at least the drum thing. We are gonna talk about mastering. And Malcolm, you are a mastering engineer. You run a company called Stone Mastering, and I do a little mastering as well, but I'm not specializing on mastering only anytime soon. It's more of I'm a mix engineer and also do mastering. And I thought I'd try to explain what I think mastering is and why we need it and what it does to the mixes and what it does for my clients. And then I'd love to hear your perspective as a mastering engineer who does a lot of mastering only, if that is something you would agree with or if you view it from a different perspective.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So I think, to me, mastering is different things. First of all, it's the most obvious one. It is kind of the final polish, like the last bit of making it sound just a little better, a little more expensive, making the low end tighter or fuller or whatever this is lacking, making the high end a little more expensive, like removing some resonances or weird stuff that's not supposed to be in there, correcting some minor mixing problems, stuff like that. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it, it's kind of a quality control for me, the last step in the process before it gets to the distribution or manufacturing, like pressing plant, like stuff. So it's the mastering engineer is, and like quality control to me, kind of per definition, can only be through someone external. Like I can't control my own work. Like I need someone else to do that. So a mastering engineer is kind of, to me, it's a second pair of ears. And the important thing is it's not only the ears, it's a different room with different speakers, different everything, listening to what I did. So it's unlikely that the same problems that I have in my room, because every room has problems and every speaker has problems, it's unlikely that the exact same problems are in the other person's room. And it's not, to me, it's not so important that it's like the perfect mastering room. Of course, that helps. But the more important thing for me is that it's a different room and a different person and a different setup and everything. So they won't hear the same problems that I heard while I was mixing. And yeah, it's kind of a quality control. The mastering engineer might hear things that I just couldn't hear when I was mixing, that might be able to correct some resonances that my room just didn't show me or whatever. And like every room has stuff like that. So that's another thing. It's also like a feedback quality control thing, because a good mastering engineer should, I think, always tell the mixer if there's stuff that might be better fixed in the mix and not in mastering. So at least when I get stuff to master and there's an obvious thing that's wrong, I would always tell the artist or the engineer if that this is the case, and ask if they could fix it and then like resend it. So that's also like a feedback learning thing for me. Every time I send stuff to mastering engineer, I learn a little bit about my mixing and I get feedback. And then it's, yeah, that's basically the main things and how I look at it. And I think the mastering that you do when you do it as a mixer, or if you mix and master stuff, which is what I do a lot, you can do that, and I do it, and I wouldn't do it if it wouldn't be possible, and many people do that. But actually, I don't consider that even mastering. I think if I master my own stuff, it's just part of mixing. I haven't mastered it, I just mixed it. I made it sound as good as possible, but that's what I do in mixing. And I think that real, quote unquote, real mastering is not possible if you mix yourself, because that would be a separate step with all those things that I explained. And if I mix something, my goal is always to make it sound as good as possible. And then only then I am done with the mix. So what would I do then to improve it? I've already done everything I can to make it the best it can be. So I made it louder, or I made sure that I did stuff that I wouldn't do if I would send it to a mastering engineer. But essentially, I've just mixed it and made it sound as good as possible. It's not the same as mastering. So I wouldn't even consider that mastering. I always tell clients that if they want to do it with me, it's cheaper than an external mastering engineer, of course. And I do it as kind of as an additional step, as a part of the mix. Yeah, I don't consider it like separate mastering. And I kind of include it in the mix. So that's the way I look at the whole thing. And then there's the technical stuff, like the finalizing with like the order of songs, creating the sequence, embedding codes, making sure that all the different file formats get exported. So you have a file for video and a file for streaming and one for Apple Digital Masters and the DDP and the vinyl and everything. So that's the last final thing that's also part of mastering.
Right.
And that's how I look at it. And the last thing I want to add, and then I'm curious what you say.
Ahead.
The last thing I want to add is historically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think that what we call mastering now, and we will call it that way, is actually pre-mastering. And mastering originally was the transfer of the mix to a certain medium, like to vinyl, like from the tape to vinyl and stuff. And that what we call mastering now is kind of pre-mastering. So it's what happens before the actual transfer, because the transfer is not necessary anymore in most cases. But and that's why you will. I'm just saying that because people will read or hear those two terms. They will hear pre-mastering and mastering, and they get kind of confused. But nowadays, I think if we talk about audio mastering, we mean the whole thing. So,
yeah. So I'm not a history buff, and I came into this world before mastering to tape was the norm. So I may be wrong on this, but I believe that you are absolutely correct on that. That even today, if because tape is, or sorry, not tape, vinyl, for example, is popular again. If you make masters for vinyl, you're actually providing the vinyl plant with what we call vinyl pre-masters. And that's where mastering originally came around, was to prepare stuff for that transfer, because the mix that might be sent in might not translate onto vinyl at all. They might, I believe the problem often was that there could be too much low end, which would cause the vinyl to skip. So you had to prepare it to be put onto vinyl. And that was mastering. And now that has changed a lot. Mastering is much more about that final step of quality control and making sure it's polished and at its optimal loudness for release on whatever format. We're still taking into consideration what format we're going to today. So if CD is the end game versus streaming, that is important for the mastering engineer to know. But it's much less about actually preparing for a physical platform, I guess. So I think you're right there. I want to quickly touch on the mastering your own mixing, like you were talking about. Is that mastering? And I mean, on a technical standpoint, yes, I guess it is mastering, but I think you're right. I think it is more likely that the mindset you're going into when you are, quote unquote, mastering your own mixes is still mixing. Because, and I do this too, I still mix songs. So if I'm mixing a song and I'm kind of at the mastering stage, but I hear that my kick drum doesn't have enough click or something, enough tack, chances are I'm going to go and jump onto my kick channel and adjust it there, not on the 2-bus, right? Where a mastering engineer wouldn't have that option. So the whole mindset and problem solving has to really flip. And when a mastering engineer receives a file, they just receive a stereo mix. So they don't have the option of going and changing that one piece of it. They have to make a decision that's going to affect everything. So if I boost some 4 to 6K or something to try and get some attack and presence on that kick drum, and that solves that problem, it might also bring up the vocals or the fizzy guitar stuff, right? Like it could have all these side effects, and we really have to think about what's the cost of the decision we're making. Is there a smarter way we can accomplish the same goal without these side effects? And is it worth it all around to provide this change? It really is just a different mindset more than anything to me. That mastering is a completely different mindset. And there's the quote, can you see the forest from the trees or something like that? People can't see the forest from the trees or the trees from the forest. Yeah. And mixing is the trees and mastering is the forest. That's how I see it. And I think that really kind of for me visualizes it in a cool way, where in mixing you can really hone in on each stump and hand color those trees, where mastering you just have to look at this whole big thing and make decisions based on that. So you can technically master your own mixes, but it's going to end up being different. And I think if that's something you want to do, you should actually bounce off a mix into a new session and try and master it from that session without all of your multi-tracks available. Even if you end up going and printing a new mix, like you'll get to a point and you'll be like, okay, obviously I should have changed this in the mix. But that mindset's going to, I think, result in a better product for you. I don't know, maybe it won't because maybe you don't think like that, but
yeah. Basically, I think that most people listening, they will experiment with it and some will mix and master and stuff, but I think what's most important is that as musicians, like when you not really master or mix it all yourself, you understand why you actually need it and why. You explained it really well, and the visualization with the forest and the trees is really cool, because I think that especially musicians and not mixers or mastering engineers, of course, they kind of don't understand, because it's just hard to understand if you're not doing it every day and if you're not really like they don't understand what it actually is and why they actually need it. Because when you mix and you send a mix to the client, to the band, or if you mix yourself, it is a final song kind of. And why does that need to be mastered even? What is the additional step for? Why do I have to pay for that? What is, like, we kind of explained it right now, but I still think it's a weird concept that you have a final mix and everything is made to, like, everything sounds the best it can be, and then there's still another step necessary. And why is that? And I think that's the main reason why such an episode might be valuable for musicians, I guess.
Totally. There's kind of another few aspects that I think are important to consider. Number one would be like specialization, and somebody that specializes in getting stuff as loud as it needs to be in the most transparent ways is going to be really good at that job, right? And probably better at that job than somebody that doesn't really have any experience doing that. And I don't know if you guys have listened to the radio lately or anything that's been released commercially, but things are loud. And so your mix is got to be kind of affected to get to that loudness. And either you can just throw L2 on it and try and get it there, or you can trust somebody to get it to that loudness level that is required in a way that's going to sound better. So I think there's part of mastering today is also hiring somebody to try and get your music where it needs to be in the most transparent way possible. Because like mastering isn't about changing the mix by any stretch. It's like often if I get a perfect mix, which doesn't happen very often, but if it does happen, I will not change anything. I will just get it loud. Sometimes I'll get it loud and then change it to make it sound more like it did when it showed up, because the loudness has caused like a sonic effect, so the mix doesn't sound like it did when I received it. And I want it to sound just like the mix I got, but I need it louder. Absolutely.
I love that. And that's also, again, that presents another challenge and a hard thing to understand, because then many musicians will probably ask, why do I need, in such a case, why do I need a mastering engineer then? And why do I pay that mastering engineer if he doesn't do actually anything with it except make it louder? Or if the mix is already pretty loud, which can also happen these days, many mixers, myself included, mix pretty loud already sometimes. And so if there's not much a mastering engineer does, except like saying that it's great and sending it back basically the same as it came in, is it still worth having that mastering engineer then?
I think so. I mean, I usually when I mix something, I actually hire a different mastering engineer. Yeah. So, I mean, that should have some weight, I think. A mastering engineer hires another mastering engineer when he mixes something.
Yeah.
Because I believe that like outside perspective is so valuable, because you could be way off. Sometimes you just get lost in the mix and you're like, okay, it sounds great. And they're like, whoa, okay, I did this and this and this. Or, hey, could you change this? And then I'll master it. And you're like, oh my God, thankfully they gave me this insight, because it really makes a difference. So just the unbiased ear is worth it, I think, because mastering isn't expensive in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
Like when you add up everything you've put into make all the time, all the gear, the studio time if you've done that, the mixing if you've paid for that, chances are you've invested quite a bit of money, and mastering is a drop in the bucket compared to all that stuff. And like you said, a good mastering engineer will also provide feedback when it's needed, and when they think it will be useful to the mixer. So there's also like this learning part of it, which is easily worth the price of admission usually too.
Sure, 100%. And I totally believe in that. And I would actually be glad. I would never be mad if a mastering engineer told me that they didn't do anything. I would be glad because that means that the mix is great.
It's flattering.
That the song is great. Like that's good news. And all the technical stuff still has to be done, and the feedback is there. And like I wouldn't feel bad. I actually would. That's actually the goal. Like I always hope that happens, because that means everything else was done right. You know.
Totally. Yeah. A mastering engineer telling you that they didn't have to change anything in your mix is like the highest form of flattery in the audio world.
Yeah.
I remember reading, there was an article with Andrew Sheps about mixing on headphones in the box. I think he mixed like a record with an Apollo Twin using headphones or something.
He does all of his records that way right now.
Exactly. So I think this was like his first one, and he took it to Abbey Roads or something to get mastered, and he was all nervous waiting there. And then they came out and they were like, well, we can charge you for the extra couple hours, but we're already done. We just had to turn it up. It was perfect. Yeah. And he was like, all right, sweet. But like even Andrew Sheps is hiring mastering engineers, and he's stoked when they're like, oh, it's good to go,
Yeah, absolutely. And he's one of those mixers who mix so loud that it's basically just about the transfer. And he actually says that he doesn't want a mastering engineer to change his mixes because he spent a lot of time getting it to sound that way. And it would be weird to get it back and have it sound completely different, because if you know what you're doing, there's a reason why it sounds that way. So it's basically just about making sure that it works on all the different platforms and on all different speaker systems, and it's to correct his headphones or listening environment that he's mixed in, because that might have problems, and the mastering engineer will hear that and correct it. But the balance and all the decisions made during mixing should be the same, and it's as he called it,
in theory.
It should just be about the transfer, actually. And in his case, it's not even so much about turning it up, because his mixes sometimes are already kind of like really, really crushed. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's totally true. Another thing that people kind of forget about is the mastering between songs. So I think people mixing themselves might have a hard time understanding why they need mastering when it's just a single. But it becomes especially important when they send off like an EP, where somebody actually now looks at all the songs together, again, looking at the forest, not the trees, and notices that song 5 is way less compressed or way darker than the rest, kind of thing. And that kind of stuff is really easy to miss when you're focusing on the little nitty gritties, like, is my snare tone perfect? You're probably not going to notice that the whole mix is overall darker than the rest if your snares sound the same, So a mastering engineer can then come in and try and adjust that dark mix to kind of suit the rest of the songs without actually changing the overall perception of the mix, kind of just like tilting it the way it needs to go, I guess. And that kind of stuff plays a huge role in like the continuity of the album as a whole.
Absolutely. And also, true, I totally forgot about that, but that's so true. Also, not only that the songs match sonically or make sense sonically, that there's a flow through the record, but also things like the breaks in between the songs. Mm-hmm. It makes such a difference, and it takes a lot of experience to get that right, actually. It makes such a difference if there are short or long breaks, how long they are. Sometimes it makes sense to have kind of rhythmic breaks that it just like is a natural like transition to the next song. Sometimes it makes sense to just leave a little silence there and like let the listener breathe and then the next song starts. And sometimes the next song has to start right away, or there has to be no gap at all. And I find that to be particularly difficult, and it takes a lot of experience just to get to know what works and to get that right. And it's one of those things where many people probably wouldn't even care nowadays, because wouldn't even care about nowadays, because like who listens to albums anyways, or EPs. But I think there still are people who listen to whole records and who like listening to songs in context. And there are still albums or EPs being made that have a concept or that need to have a flow, and so that's absolutely an important thing that mastering needs to take care of. Yeah,
totally. I think on that topic, the most important part for me is that there's still artists that really care about making a collective piece of art, where it's not just a collection of songs. It's like this is The Wall, or this is Dark Side of the Moon. It's like this is a whole masterpiece all put together, and it's important that it's listened to together. And like people that really look at their art that way, that's when sequencing has to be just perfect. And I love that stuff. I love listening to it from start to finish. I especially love when the ending of the album goes back into the start of the album in a great way. Like if you listen to it on repeat and they've even got connected that. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, absolutely. And also if it's not your own sequence, it might even be things like the tilting that you were talking about. It could also apply if you tell your mastering engineer that you want to, if it's a single and you want that single you want to get that into certain types of playlists on Spotify, or into if you want that to happen next to a certain type of other productions and songs, then the mastering engineer can also make sure that the whole, not without changing the mix or the balance, but just tilting it, as you said, to make sure, okay, next to all the other productions that you want your thing to compete with, that it doesn't sound weaker or thinner, or that it doesn't sound too brittle or whatever. And you can also kind of adjust to that to an extent. So if you know what the goal and the medium is that it's made for, you can make sure that in such a playlist it works well and it has the same kind of energy, the same dynamic or lack thereof, or the same density or the same amount of low end. And you can just make sure that your song in such a playlist after another song doesn't sound weaker. So
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. People listening to this, send your mix engineer a reference mix of a band that you like and think suits what you're trying to do, and then send that same thing to the mastering engineer.
Yeah.
It's such a good idea, and I don't know, I have to ask for it, and people still don't do it. It's not like I'm going to make you sound like this band, but I'm going to learn something from what you send. There's no harm can come from that. Unless you're just way off, and if you're a death metal band and you send me a Pixies song, that's not going to be useful for me at all. But
yeah, but that happens as well. It's not that it doesn't happen.
It does. People are delusional.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, just go ahead. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on more of your thoughts on that. So you kind of explain what mastering is to you with the forest and the trees stuff. What else is there? What
there's also
what did I forget in my explanation, or what did you think?
Like the metadata, DDP creation kind of stuff, and that's like the really dry, boring stuff of mastering. That's like where the song data and ISRC codes. That's right.
Yeah.
gets put into the DDP, which then goes to the manufacturing plant, and DDP is like a disk image of your entire album that gets used to be burnt into a CD essentially, or replicated into a CD. And then that has all of the sequencing data and all the data pretty much of your entire albums locked in this file, so that it is then captured inside of your CDs as well. That stuff's all really boring, but that's the mastering engineer's job as well. That is only really relevant when you're actually doing physical CDs. It's not relevant for online streaming stuff anymore, because you enter all that data when you upload it to your digital distributor. So there's that kind of stuff. I mean, I think we did a pretty good job. I'm kind of looking through my notes here that I prepared before this, but
there are some stuff that I'd like to hear from you that I read in there. Like the first of all, like the difference, like just so to be clear and to make it the clear distinction, like what is the actual technical difference from mixing and mastering? Like not the way you look at it, not the perspective thing, but what is it actually? What do you do? Which kind of files do you receive and treat, and what's the end result of that?
Right. Okay. So I receive whatever file they recorded in, generally. So the highest resolution version of their song, but printed into
not a multi-track, one file, right?
Not into a multi-track. Yes. So one stereo file. Yeah. So all of the I guess it's good to be this broad for people that are really new to this. You've got your multi-track recording, so there's a single channel for your kick and your snare and everything. that all gets recorded down to a single stereo file, which is just like any song you would pull up on Spotify. That's a stereo mix. I receive that stereo mix, so I don't have access to all the files anymore. I just have access to your mix. And then I will apply my processing in that realm. And then eventually, probably because you probably recorded at a higher sample rate and bit rate than the end result will be, because chances are you need it to be a 16-bit 44.1 wave file. That's kind of like the norm. So I have to dither it down to that quality. And there's a process for doing that correctly as well, to make sure there's not or minimal sonic loss in the downgrading of that. And then that file, the reason that file is the norm is because that's what CDs accept. They don't accept a higher quality file than that. So we dither it down to that. And then people tend to just use that file for online stuff as well. Little hint though, you can request higher quality files now to be uploaded online because some services will take those higher quality files. Does it matter? I think so, but most people don't care. Yeah. You'll be fine. It's not going to make the difference between a hit song or not. But just, if you really prefer to have the high quality file, the highest quality possible file, request master files of that as well. And then you could just have the dithered ones and the full res files as well. I also provide MP3s usually as well, just so people have a good MP3 to use on their like website player that only accepts MP3 files. I would prefer to give them a good one rather than them making their own crappy one with some free website.
Yep.
So I essentially take a full res file, make it sound as good as I can, and then deliver it in the formats required, depending on what they're doing with it, and make sure it gets to that format in the best way possible as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers the question, absolutely. So we have the multi-track mixed down to a stereo track, that is the mix. Mm-hmm. And then we have the processing of that stereo track and the mastering and making sure all the formats are there and that it works on every playback system and stuff. So
yes.
And everything you just explained. So yeah, that explains it technically.
There's one more type of mastering, just to mention quickly.
Yeah, of course.
I wouldn't recommend this, but you can do stem mastering.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that is when, if you were the mixer, you would send me like a stereo track that is just all the drums from the mix, a stereo track for all the guitars, a stereo track for all the bass, a stereo track for all the vocals, and then, groups, kind of like 3 to 5 groups usually. And then I would take those 5 stems and kind of master them into the song. And the theory is that those 5 stems or whatever, once I loaded them into my DAW, they would play back your mix perfectly. And then I would just master like normal. But I would have a little more control because I can just tweak the individual stems instead. That is essentially mixing to me. It is a middle ground between mixing and mastering, but if you can't commit to the mix being a stereo track and you're thinking you should send the stems, you're probably not done mixing or you need help mixing. That's my theory on that. I mean, I'll accept it if that's what you really want me to do, but chances are you just need to work harder on your mix.
Yes. And I need to add one thing here because that's I will probably keep reading that for years to come, but people always confuse tracks or multi-track with stems. I hear people calling their multi-tracks or their tracks stems all the time, and I just want to say that this is not correct or not true, and it's confusing. So tracks are like individual tracks, and a multi-track is like a whole like folder of those tracks are the individual audio files of your instruments, microphones, whatever, like the kick drum, the snare drum, the bass, the vocal, stuff like that. Those are tracks, and a multi-track is the whole thing of the whole folder. And stems are groups where those tracks are grouped together to create a stereo drum file, for example, or a stereo vocal file with all the vocals, stereo guitar file with all the guitars, and those are called stems. So, yeah, next time you ask your mixer what format your tracks should be, your stuff, call them tracks and not stems. It's confusing.
Yeah. Or like, hey, can we get the stems? We want to like remix the song or something.
yeah.
I'm like, okay, do you actually want the stems or do you want the tracks? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
And it's such a different job to prepare.
Exactly.
So yeah,
but
I'm
that's
with
a
you
good
on
one.
that.
I forgot about stem mastering, and I'm kind of in the same. I have the same opinion as you here. I do it just as you do, but yeah, it's a kind of middle ground between mixing and mastering. But yeah, I think, and also it's not so much cheaper than mixing. It is in my case. I don't know how other people handle it. So I don't know if you paid for the mix and then you ask for stem mastering, it's almost as if you like pay for mixing twice. Not kind of,
Yeah.
but at least I charge a good amount of money for stem mastering because it's more like
mix.
mixing than actually mastering. There's a lot that goes into it, and it depending on the material, it can take me just as long as a mix does. And so I don't know. I also think a great mix doesn't need to do. You don't need to do stem mastering then, because that also
Totally.
goes against. And I like the how you phrased it there in your notes that you prepare for the session. That goes against all the whole not doing harm or not changing the mix thing. Because if someone sends you stems, they're basically asking you to turn it upside down in a way, because otherwise they wouldn't give you that much power and control, and like it's dangerous. So I would love to hear you talk about that again. What you wrote down there, this oath that a mastering engineer has to swear. Basically.
Yeah, thou shalt not harm. Yeah. So I mean, occasionally, I must admit, I'll break that rule. If I think that the change I'm making is really going to save the mix, even if there is a small side effect, as long as it outweighs that side effect to a great deal. This is like only on a really unexperienced person's mix, where there's just like, I have to really work some black magic to save it, and there's going to be a side effect to every decision. So if that side effect is a negative, but the overall mix is greatly improved, I'll go ahead and do it. But generally speaking, if there's going to be a negative side effect, I'm going to kind of, my bias will be to say, okay, I'm not going to do that. It's not worth it. They sent me a mix for a reason. That was mixed this way for a reason. And that decision was probably, they probably like the snare loud. Most people probably don't like the snare that loud, but they did. And that's what they sent me. I have to then think, okay, so say it's like a really aggressive rock song and I want it to be very aggressive and loud, just to kind of suit other music in that genre. And I think aggressive rock music sounds better, aggressive and loud. By getting it that aggressive and loud, the snare might be like pushed down into the mix by the limiter or the clipping I'm using. I have to figure out a way then to either limit it differently so that the snare doesn't get ducked as much, or do that and then figure out a way to make the snare kind of come back to life, so that they don't notice that the snare is quieter.
Yeah.
So maybe you can do harm, but you have to clean up your mess in mastering for sure.
Absolutely. That's a great example with the snare, I think. And yeah, and you're tempted to, because you can actually, with the tools nowadays, you have a lot of power in mastering.
Yes.
I mean, a classic mastering setup with all analog gear, and that's how still many of the best mastering engineers work. Those are rather like broad strokes and coloring and polish and that type of stuff. I mean, there are surgical analog EQs, but it's not. With analog setups, it's more about like broad strokes and general like vibe and character and adding colors and stuff like that. But with the tools now, and basically also every mastering engineer does that, even if they have a great analog setup, you also have available all the digital tools and all the stuff. And even with a stereo file without stems or tracks, there's so much you can do. And that's dangerous because you can, your own opinion and what you think a song should sound like can get in the way of making the best product for the client, because just what you said, because if you give in to that instinct that you might have about something, the chances are you're going to drastically change it, and it will be better for you, but it's not anymore what the client wanted at all. And you can do that. There's, especially with mid-side stuff and stuff like that, you can do so much. Sometimes, and I'm guilty of that as well. Sometimes it works. Sometimes people love it because some people who do not really have an understanding of mastering and mixing and all the differences, they hear that it's better than before or whatever, and then they are stoked and they think you did a great job. And others don't appreciate it as much because they didn't want you to alter the mix. So you should have a conversation with your mixing engineer or mastering engineer and tell them what you actually want. Like if you are, because some people are just not happy with the mix they have and they want the mastering engineer to do the best they can to improve it. And then you are basically free to do whatever you think you can do and do some magic tricks to it. But others are pretty stoked with their mix and you don't want to mess it up. And if you don't have that conversation, there's always the danger that the mastering engineer completely alters and changes the mix and the balance. And as a mastering engineer, it's always dangerous to give in to your personal taste and instinct. And sometimes when I get stuff where I think the guitars are buried and too dark and it's not really wide enough and everything is masking and stuff, like I tend to maybe EQ more highs or upper mid-range into the sides and then widening it a bit and get the guitars farther apart and brighter and stuff without changing the drums as much. And there's a lot of stuff you can do. Or I like to notch out resonances in the guitars then and stuff like that only on the sides. And that might, there's a lot of things that you can do because I think that guitars shouldn't be this harsh or this dull, for example. But they might just be what you want to have on your record, and that's why you mixed it that way. And that's why we have to have that conversation then.
I have a form that all my clients fill out as they submit a mix to me that asks them a bunch of questions specifically for that reason. And I've got certain people I know because I worked with them like over and over again repeatedly, that I know expect me to make some big changes because I'm meant to lift some extra weight for them. They're just, maybe they're not that experienced and I'm going to take it the extra mile to get it where it needs to be. So I know that I can take liberties with them, where I have other people I know that they're looking for loudness only. and I shouldn't really, I have to be as transparent as possible, which is totally great. So different people, different situations call for different treatment, and it's the mastering engineer's job to figure out what that is. So communication is super important for a mastering engineer.
Sure, absolutely. And I think when in doubt, what is your take on that? When in doubt, so if that, for some reason that communication didn't happen or the band didn't really tell you what they wanted or it was confusing or whatever, let's pretend you don't have that info. Would you... And the mix was like okay, but you feel like there could be there's something lacking, and it could have this or that to make it really work. Would you then still stick to what the mix sounded like and just basically keep that mix, but just make it better or louder, or would you then just make bold moves and hope that the band approves and you will then
pretty much
change
anything that strikes me as like less than professional, I would default to improving it. If I didn't have that info, and I always get that info, but if I didn't have that info, I would be like, okay, they expect mastering because people do expect wonders to happen. So they expect me to turn this into a piece of gold. They want me to polish the turd, and I would do that. So but I know that's contradictory, but that's like it's all based on experience and learning what to expect from people. And I think most people deep down know that their mix doesn't sound as good as the thing they're comparing it to. Because people listen to professional music all the time. So my instinct would be that they want it to sound as good as it can be.
Okay, cool. So this whole oath of thou shall not harm is really only working if you got the communication down, because only then do you know what would actually do harm and what wouldn't. So yeah, totally, because harm means different things to different people. Okay. For sure. Okay, so let's pretend I am a band and I sent you stuff to master. And so here's a couple of questions that I have for you. So like you said, you had a form, so maybe some of those questions would have already been answered. But let's say I didn't see that form and I'm hitting you up and ask a bunch of questions before I want to work with you.
Cool.
And I just throw a couple of questions at you that I get or that I got from people in the past.
Okay.
And then we'll see what you would answer to that, because that could be helpful, because those are basically real questions that people ask. So I assume, those answers would be valuable. Okay. First one. Can you turn the vocal up a bit, please?
So that's like a revision request, I guess, right?
No, that's like we
so
like the mix, but could you turn the vocal up a bit? Like if we think the vocal is a little blurry, could you turn that up?
Okay. So I would first then ask the to try and get in touch with the mix engineer, or who is the mix engineer, establish that. And then I would ask for them to send me a vocal up version. So that, by the way, that's a good thing for people to know. It is not commonplace, but it is common enough to send the mastering engineer a couple versions. So you can send just your regular mix that got approved, and then you can send a vocal up version, maybe a vocal down version. So often people label that with like V up 1. So that's vocal up 1 dB, or V up 2, vocal up 2 dB. And that is to account for changes that happen through getting music loud, essentially. So the vocal is very forward and then gets kind of pushed into the mix through compression and limiting. That's totally not essential, and I would almost say just trust your gut on that. And if I think I need an alternative version, I'll just request it. Be like, okay, that vocal is just not going to sit where we want. Could you send me up a vocal up version, and then it'll be perfect. So I don't know. I think a mastering engineer can normally guide people to that rather than them just spending a bunch of time making a bunch of versions. But yeah, so back to your question, establish who the mixing engineer is, and then ask them to send me a vocal up version. If that's not possible, which sometimes seems to happen, it's like they don't want me to know who the mixer was, or they're too embarrassed to let me know, maybe, or they've like deleted the sessions already. I have no idea what these situations are, but it's like, that's not possible. I'm like, what? Okay. Then I will try and make it happen. So situation like the lead vocal up, that's normally going to be like a mid-side move. So you can affect just like the middle of the stereo image or the sides. And normally a lead vocal is straight up the middle, hopefully.
Yeah.
So I might be able to, like give a little small boost in some frequencies that kind of highlight the vocal there. And hopefully that would accomplish what we need without too many side effects.
Okay. So you mean you don't have direct control and like a knob where you can just turn the vocal up in mastering?
Oh yeah, I just grab my vocal fader and throw it. Yeah, no, my magic vocal button. I do not. No, yeah, unfortunately not. But I do like it's amazing what you can do with that mid-side stuff, or like dynamic EQ. So say I turned it up with a mid-side EQ. So I grab some vocal frequencies. Say like they just want like I would probably reach around 3K, I think, if I wanted the vocal to appear louder. Give it a little boost there, and then that maybe, okay, the sibilance came up. All right, now I can grab a dynamic mid-side EQ that only ducks, or even like an intelligent de-esser that will just only engage when sibilances jump out, kind of thing. So now I've kind of achieved the best of both worlds. You have to be really careful with that stuff, because you don't want your hi-hat bark to get decimated or something like that. But there's really clever ways to accomplish a goal without the side effects.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And so the next question kind of goes hand in hand with that, but I really got those questions not only once. So the next one is, and I'm not, it's not that I want to make fun of people, it's just real questions, and that shows that how many people just have lack proper understanding of what mastering is. So the next one, so here's our mix. Can you please send us an instrumental and an a cappella version of that?
Yeah, love that too. Yeah, of course I can. Well, no, you can't. Obviously, you can't remove the vocal from the mix without. Yeah, it's just not possible, realistically. So again, to solve that problem, I have to get in communication with the mixer and request instrumental version or an a cappella version, okay. Whatever needed be. So that's, again, if you want that stuff, rather than, the vocal up versions like I was just talking about, The instrumental and other versions like that, like actual alt versions, a radio edit, for example, is a common one. Do send that the first time. I mean, it's fine if you send it later, but try and get that all together so the mastering engineer knows and kind of prepares for that ahead of time.
Agreed. And I think you can send it later, but many mastering engineers, myself included, will have extra fees for that, because if you just send it along with the mix, you can basically already have the session open. You might need to tweak some settings to make it work without the vocal or whatever, but it's already there, and it's not much extra effort to print a second version with when you're already working on it. But if you have to later open the session again and start all over and recall settings, even worse if you have analog gear and stuff, then this is basically like a new mastering almost, and many people will charge you extra for that if you send the alt versions later.
Yeah, I do charge like an alt fee, kind of regardless, but it's significantly less if you are prepared the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm always going to be reasonable with people, but and work with them, but like
you have to let them know that this is the case. I mean, that's the requirement, basically.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So next question. So we're uploading this to our digital distribution platform, and they are asking for an Apple Digital Masters. Do we need that? Is it worth it? Can you provide that?
You definitely don't need it. And technically I cannot provide that yet. Yeah. Because like you're talking about the verified by or the mastered for iTunes requirement kind of thing, right?
Yeah, there's a specific reason why I'm asking that, but go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm looking into that presently because I want that little badge on my website. But aside from that, like the mastering engineer I often use when I mix stuff, like I mentioned before, I'll hire an external mastering engineer for my own mixes. He told me just like he doesn't use it. He's verified and he can provide them kind of thing, but like unless he specifically is asked to provide files in that format, he doesn't do it. My understanding is that it's just like a set of guidelines they want you to follow. Is that correct? Maybe you know more about this than I do, Ben.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is because I've talked to a lot of mastering engineers about that. Not everyone has the same opinion, but there seems to be, and I might be totally wrong here, and if you are a mastering engineer listening to this, please correct me and tell me what's true. But the way I see it is, technically you could do it. You just you're not allowed to use the name and use the badge without being kind of verified by Apple or whatever. And they are providing you with tools. But I think the tools are available to everyone, right? You at least the guidelines. So they are providing you with tools to create the format in a way that is required so that you can call it an Apple Digital Masters, and it was called Mastered for iTunes before that. And it's about loudness. It's about some other things. It's about like technical specs that you have to do so that it is the right format. But basically, bottom line is it's just technical stuff that you could do anyways with or without that badge, but you have to follow these requirements. Apple has to approve you if you want to use the badge and if you want to call it Apple Digital Masters. And many people that I talked with about this, agree that it's more of a marketing thing than an actual thing that matters. Like, because Apple shows that badge next to music that's been created by those mastering studios and that's been created to these standards, and it says like Apple Digital Masters. So people assume that this is a better quality than the other records, and that's the reason why people want to have that. But if you didn't see that badge and just listen to stuff on Apple Music, you wouldn't be able to hear what is like an Apple Digital Master and what is not if it's done properly. And it's more of a, I don't know, it's more a marketing thing that Apple came up with than something really useful. At least that's how I understand it, and that's how I perceive it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's kind of weird. And I think the question here is only, do you want your listeners to see that and just is it important to you that you come across as someone who did that extra step and have that Apple Digital Masters thing in place, or do you think your listeners just won't care? Because it doesn't really make your song sound better. For some people it might just look different if that badge is there, but that's basically the main difference to me.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I'm just getting it so I can have it on my website.
Yeah.
The little badge, it's like you said, I want to get it for a marketing reason. There's really no reason. And honestly, I mean, I know iTunes is a big company, or Apple, but like iTunes and stuff, it's big, but Spotify is slaughtering them.
Yeah.
So people are mostly listening on Spotify. So getting your music mastered for a different platform than Spotify doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
In the big scheme.
Yeah. And I mean, there are mastering engineers, one that I work with frequently, who do provide you with all the files regardless. So you just get the Apple Digital Masters and then you can decide if you use them or not.
Right.
Many mastering engineers will have a pretty sophisticated setup where they can create and export all those formats pretty efficiently. And it's quicker to actually just do all of them and then let the artist or the label decide what they want to use than to ask every single person what they want and why. They just do it and provide it. It's like kind of a flat rate thing, and you just get all the things. And if you get it, I would say just use them. If your provider, if the digital distribution platform, if they have the option for these masters, then use them. If you don't, it's not a big deal. But if you have them, yeah, just use them and upload them. But know that it's not really required to be on Apple Podcast, because many people think that, and it will not sound dramatically better. It's just a thing that Apple came up with to be special, I guess, because they want people to think that music on Apple Music sounds better than anywhere else if that badge is there.
Yeah.
And that's the main reason. So, yeah.
Yeah. There you go. While we were talking about this, I downloaded this piece of software that you just load the full res file into, and it spits out an Apple Master. So that's all there is to it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's essentially a dither.
Yeah, and they have there's more to it. I think there's a loudness level that you should not be. I don't know. I'm not. No, I don't know what I'm talking about here because I don't do these as well. But I think there's more than just there's something to it, but it's nothing that you wouldn't be able to do without the Apple Masters thing.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, but that's a common question because people just don't know, and they're wondering if that's required to get their stuff on Apple Music, and it's not. Do you have any frequently asked questions, or one that sticks out particularly that you could talk about?
Oh yeah, the big one lately has been about LUFS and how loud it should be mastered for, and stuff like that. That seems to be coming up a lot, and there's a lot of, I think, misinformation about that. So everybody's saying that your music should be mastered too. What are they saying? See, that's how much I don't care about this. I think they're saying -14 LUFS.
There's different opinions, but it's go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, the one that pops up right away is -14 is kind of the sweet spot for the loudness on streaming platforms like Spotify. And it's amazing because there's some really great mastering engineers that really swear by this. But I don't know if it's really hard to explain, but I've mastered rock songs that should be loud to much louder than that, and then I've made masters of them much quieter around that -14. And my God, it is not a good way to listen to rock and roll music, if you ask me.
No.
Rock music shouldn't be that quiet at all. So the idea is that, okay, there's a sweet spot, and if you're any louder, they're just going to turn you down, so you've wasted dynamic range, which is true. You could be more dynamic and get away with it on streaming platforms like that. But that doesn't mean that your music sounds better more dynamically. Your music might sound better with less dynamics. And if that's the case, make it less dynamic. All this means is that you can make your music sound as good as you want, and you don't have to be loud, which is cool. So if you have a soft acoustic song, it doesn't have to be really, really stinking loud, and it'll still perform well on Spotify and other streaming platforms. But that doesn't mean you have to be quiet.
Nope.
So if you're making a loud song, make it loud, make it slam, and it'll just get turned down, but it'll still be loud in context.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And dense and full of energy and like all these other things that happen if you make it loud. Minus 14, I don't think I ever delivered a mix at minus 14 to a mastering engineer because my mixes don't have that much dynamic range. My mixes, my rock mixes or heavy mixes, they might have like, I don't know, 7 or 8 dB dynamic range or something like that, or 10 or I don't know, but not 14, and and if you're talking LUFS, not minus 14 UFS. It's like there's in the mix already too much clipping and limiting and compressing like happening just to get the tones that I want. So that even without a mastering limiter, if I had just hit play, I'm already louder than that. It's
totally. Yeah, so I'm with you there. Pretty much all people need to take away from that is loudness doesn't matter. Just trust your ears, and you know, hopefully trust your mastering engineer to make a good decision for the loudness.
Okay, then
that's another reason that providing a reference track is so important. You know, if somebody sends me a Royal Blood track as a reference track, which if you guys don't listen to Royal Blood and you like rock music, go check them out. They're so good. But they're stinking loud and it sounds awesome like that. So, you know, that's like a really good reference to have if you're trying to be aggressive and loud like they are. It's like, okay, these people are okay with this kind of heavy loudness. Let's go for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. This is just part of the aesthetic, and just it's okay to be loud, and don't be afraid to ask for that, because some mastering engineers might send you back pretty quiet masters and you might be afraid to ask because you think that's the wrong thing to do. But don't be afraid to ask, and if they're not willing to do it, then probably go with another mastering engineer. And because this could happen, there are like great mastering engineers who just don't, like, they will probably, if you ask, but who will try to make you believe that that you shouldn't do that, but it's okay to be loud. It's like Malcolm said, it's not a must, but it's totally okay if that's what you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Basically, that's it, because all the other questions that I have are not really relevant, because those are more like mixing engineer questions, not so much band questions. Bands mostly care about why they actually need it, why, what formats do they really need, and what goes where, and which of the files is meant for what. And a good mastering engineer will probably label them in a way that it makes sense to the band when they get the files. And then stuff like the Apple masters and basic understanding of what actually happens in mastering. And all the other things are more relevant if you are a mixing engineer and send stuff off to mastering.
Yeah. You know, I just wanted to add one thing, because you asked, like, okay, why, trying to explain to bands why it might be worth it. And we've talked in past episodes about copying people that are doing what you want and kind of mimicking people that are successful.
Sure.
And it's a pretty recurring theme that professional productions are getting mastered. And sorry, I should rephrase that. They're either getting mastered by a really experienced mix engineer, or they're getting sent to an external mastering engineer as well. But like there's always a professional at the end of the chain.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, the quality control thing. Yeah, it's just got to be there. And mastering is, for that reason alone, I love to work with mastering engineers. And to be honest, like, there's not that I couldn't do it technically, and it would sound fine, and you probably would have never asked for anything different, and you would be happy with the result. But still, that the little difference that it makes, and also the feedback and the potential, like the security just to know that everything's okay and you didn't overlook something, that's worth it alone for me. It could be that 8 out of 10 mixes that I master myself are perfectly fine, but then there could be 1 or 2 that have a real problem that I just didn't notice. And without mastering, this problem did never get solved. And if we had used a mastering engineer, this record might be better, or did not have this problem. And I don't know. I don't want to have that risk. I just want to know that 2 individuals in separate rooms have listened to it and both individually say it's okay, it's ready to release. That's just the thing that I want to have. I don't want to. I don't like it if I'm the only person responsible for the end thing. I can't do it, and I'm confident enough to say that it's okay, but it's much better if you have 2 individuals sign off on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like mastering's the most affordable way to implement a professional into your project.
Yes.
Right. Like it is. And it can make a huge difference. The other thing that kind of came to mind is that I kind of forgot to mention is that like the mastering engineer, is really in charge of saying, okay, this is finished. It's done. So that's not always just like sonically, like I'm also looking for weird things, like the amount of times I've had to go and remove click tracks bleed in the quiet sections of songs, and or like there's a little like stick hit that's just totally not meant to be there. And sometimes I can fix that kind of stuff with some tools, and that kind of stuff is also considered mastering to me. It's like, okay, like I got to fix this click in the song, or there's a digital click. I have to figure out a way to remove that kind of thing, right? It's all kind of all consuming. It's like, all right, is it finished? All right, there's an error. I have to fix that. Now it's done.
Absolutely. I just totally forgot about that. And that's also, most mastering engineers will have, and that's kind of a requirement for mastering, I guess, is they will have good monitoring and they will have, of course, good ears. And there might be something in your mix that you just, for some reason, did not hear. There might be a distortion. There might be something weird, that the mix might be totally fine and it might be well balanced and have the right vibe and everything, but there might be a technical issue that you just didn't notice, some noise, some distortion and anything or something like that. And a mastering engineer with really high quality speakers or headphones that he uses or she uses to check stuff, and high quality converters and stuff that just makes things like this, like these audible. They will hear it. Like they will have a more sophisticated and more high-end listening environment than most listeners. And if they can't spot it, it's not there or it's not relevant. But it might be there if you are just mixing, because I mean, how many mixing engineers do great work and deliver great mixes on NS10s or some monitors like that? They are great, and you can make awesome mixes on those. But you probably will never hear a subtle distortion way up in the frequency spectrum with some, I don't know what weird thing, because they just don't have, those speakers just don't have the resolution and they cannot reproduce stuff like that, but a mastering rig can or should be able to do that. And yeah, if a mastering engineer says it's okay, they can't hear anything, then it's good enough for the listeners usually.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. And it's, if you've ever been to a real like high-end mastering studio, if you've never been there as a musician, I would highly recommend, if you have one near you, that you attend a session one day. I did that years ago for the first time, and it was mind-blowing to hear speakers like that, to be in a room like that, to hear people being stuff, and you just can't tell a difference, and they clearly they explain to you what is happening, and you're just standing there and you don't hear anything, and you're just wondering like what the hell's going on here. And now I can hear many of those things that I wasn't able to hear back then, because you have to train your ears to be able to hear that. But it's a really cool experience, and it kind of shows you what actually goes into being a great mastering engineer and what those people are there for and why you pay them money to do what they do, even if they don't do much. It's just the experience, the trained ears, the high-end gear, the years of training to get to a point to be able to do that. Once you've been there, you absolutely know why it's worth every single cent that you pay for that. And yeah. So
yeah, even today, like, I generally don't finish a mix until I'm happy with it, but I send it off and I get it back and I'm like, okay, like I didn't know it could be this little bit better, and I'm so glad I did that. Like whenever a master comes back better than you sent it in, it's like, oh wow, I didn't know it could go there, so this was worth it.
Sure, absolutely. And there's one more thing before we wrap this up that I want to add, but which I found really useful, and this is, many people like to do, many bands or labels and sometimes mix engineers like to do test masters. They ask mastering engineers to do free tests, and many mastering engineers will do that, Malcolm included. He will do a test master for you if you ask him, or if you go to stonemastering.com and request that. And that's a great thing. But I think, actually, what's even better than asking for a free test master is the following. First of all, many mastering engineers won't do it. Not everyone does it. Like it's totally up to the mastering engineer. And it doesn't have to, it's not a sign that one is better than the other. It just some people do it and others don't for whatever reasons. But anyway, I think better than asking or requesting a free test master is if you have an album or an EP or something where there's a little bit of a budget going into anyways, and not just a single, but if you're spending a couple $1,000s on it for an album anyway, then it's not in the grand scheme of things not so expensive to just pay 2 different mastering engineers to do a test master and not tell them that it's a test master. Just hire them for one song off that record and have them master it as a single, and then see what you get back, because it's just natural that if you tell someone that he's competing with someone else and it's a test and they could potentially get the record, it could be that they do things differently than they would if they were just hired. And especially if you are like not a well-known band, and I always assume that people are great, and most mastering engineers are great and would never do that. But it could be that you are just a not so well-known band, and they don't know, it's just a single, a one-off thing. It's not too expensive, and maybe they just get it done and move on and don't really think about, not that I think that many mastering engineers do that or should do that at all, but it could be the case. And if you want to be safe, if you want to make sure that you actually hear what those people do if they don't know that they're competing, then just ask them to master a single song and then see what you like best, and then hire that person for the rest of the record.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's a great way to do it. I think that's pretty, because I truly believe that even if people are not mean, I truly believe that if you know that you're in competition with someone else and that there's a potential full-length record there, then I don't know, maybe you would just do different things.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, most people that request a test master from me aren't even putting me up against somebody else. It's just that they just want to see my work kind of thing, and I'm happy with that. I don't really, for me, I don't know if it would make a difference. I think I master it as if it's going to be the one either way, but I see your point for sure. Yeah,
it should be that way, of course, but you never know. And it's just interesting because you then, there are no questions. You just get the real thing, and it's not too expensive. I mean, let's say, I don't know, but it depends on the rate of the mastering engineer. But it's doing one song with 2 individuals is, if you're doing a whole record anyways, it's not that expensive, and it's worth just paying them and then choosing the one who does the better job. That's a great way to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so Malcolm, what did we forget? What do you want to add to this as a mastering engineer? Is there anything you would want to ask people, maybe, or tell people if they record themselves? Are there things that they could do to make your life as a mastering engineer easier, or is it more a thing that mix engineers need to take care of?
I think really just take advantage of the communication thing. That benefits both ways. So communicate ahead of time with your mastering engineer about how they want files delivered. And also send them your mix so they can kind of give you feedback beforehand. Unless you assert in your mix slams and it's just not necessary, But generally, I think that's just something that should always be done. Why they're just remove the ego from it, send it to them, get some feedback from their mastering rig before they even master it. Every time, I think that would be worth it. It's up to you, but I totally think every band should do that, at least for a song, and don't be afraid to do it before the rest of the songs are ready. I think people kind of think sometimes that they're taking advantage of my time if they do that, where they send me the first song and the rest aren't ready. But send me that first song that's been the single or something. I'll give you feedback, and then that mix, whoever's mixing it that gets that feedback is going to be better equipped to move forward with the rest of the songs, right? Rather than repeating the same mistake potentially for the rest of the songs. So get in touch with your mastering engineer before you need mastering. Get in touch during mixing.
Also makes it easier to get your stuff, or more likely to get your stuff in time, because it might just happen that you wait until the mix is done and then you want the masters now, but the mastering engineer might not be available right now. And
that's also good to schedule.
So if you get a touch early, you just know that right after the mixing, the mastering engineer will actually have time to master your record, and you won't have to wait another 4 weeks before they can get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. During quarantine, I've probably got the time, but otherwise, I'm pretty busy. So get in touch.
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to plug your website here once again, because people should check that out and should see what mastering does to their mixes, because you offer a free test mix. So there's no risk. You can try it out for yourself. You can see what proper mastering does to your mixes. You can see if it's worth it to you. You can also see what's not possible, because that's also a thing that you just have to learn. You have to get used to what mastering can and can't do. And because if you send, it could be that people now go ahead and record a demo and then don't really mix it, or don't have a mixer, and then just send you the demo and then expect that a full polished record comes back, and that's just probably won't happen. It will be better than before, but
I'll do my best.
Exactly. But I just want people to know that there's a reason for all these individual steps. But go ahead, your record will definitely come back better than it was before. All the boxes will be checked. If there's an issue, Malcolm will let you know, and you can find out what mastering is, how it works, and how it's done properly. And go to stonemastering.com. And then you can request a free test master. I don't know, do you have a direct link or URL for them to go to for the test master, or is it just a button on your website?
I probably do, but I don't know it off the head. So yeah, just go to stonemastering.com. You can't miss it. There's literally 30 call to actions on every page. So you'll be fine. And also, even if you don't want a test master, like I said, get in touch early before you need mastering. Before mixing even. So just email me, get in touch if you have questions about mastering, about something we didn't cover in here. Email me there. That's fine. I'm available.
Yeah, that's what I meant with mastering can't do. Not that they should send you stuff and then it wouldn't happen, but they should just contact you and you will tell them before you even start what's possible.
Yeah, totally.
And that's worth it alone.
Absolutely.
Get in touch with Mark directly, and you won't regret it. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Then let's wrap this up, I guess. If you have any questions other than contacting Malk and asking him or having him work on your records, you can always email us at podcast@theselfrecordingband. I will forward it to Malcolm if it's a mastering specific question. If you forget anything, if you got anything wrong, because there's so many technical things, and if you're not as in my case, I'm not a specialized mastering engineer who does mastering only, so I could have gotten the whole Apple Digital Masters thing wrong or something. If that's the case.
Yeah, I don't know how we did on that part.
Yeah. And so if that's the case, please tell me what it really is like. Just explain it to me. I genuinely want to know. So educate me and tell me what I got wrong here. Other than that, I hope it was helpful. I hope now, I don't know if there's still quarantine when you're listening to this, but if it is, you'll be in front of your phone or computer anyway. So do a little research. Find some mastering studios, compare them, hit up Malcolm, go to his website, learn about that stuff, and then for your next production, you will have that additional step there, hopefully.
Totally.
Cool. That's it.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.